What's up? I'm going to give you 5 pro tips to help you design Instagram carousels to help you to blow up and build a community of raving fans. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I help people create better Instagram content so they can build an engaged community and turn their knowledge into income. Now today I want to give you my 5 top pro tips to help you to design effective Instagram carousels. Now, I'm not talking about effective in terms of vanity metrics, likes, shares, saves. It can be that, but just effective in the sense that they get the job done and they get your attention and help you to build and grow a raving community of fans. Now, for the most part, it's not actually the ideas that get your attention, it's the execution of those ideas. So I want to jump straight into the first tip, which is to understand the danger zone. So the danger zone is essentially a phrase that I coined to describe this sort of area on Instagram where 90% of content falls into, meaning that 90% of content is pretty much the same. It all looks the same, it all sounds the same, it all does the same thing. It doesn't have a huge impact on us as consumers. So for your content, for your carousels to stand out and to design them in a way that stands out from the crowd, you have to create them in such a way that they fall outside of that middle danger zone and they go to either end of the spectrum. Now this spectrum can cover many things. It can cover your visual, it can cover the ideas, it can cover your opinions, it can cover your copywriting. You just have to make sure that you go to the extreme. So visually, are you minimal or are you quite bold? In terms of your opinions, are you quite bold with your opinions or are you quite agreeable and you say the same thing as everyone else? You have to make sure that whatever you do, whatever part of your carousel you are designing, that you don't fall into that danger zone. Go to the extremes, be polarizing, and it's the easiest way for you to create carousels that stand out and help you to build that really strong community of people who love what it is you do. So the next tip is to have focus. Now, one of the biggest mistakes I see, particularly from newer creators, is that they look at the big influencers, they look at some of the people, particularly in the carousel community, who are creating this sort of visually, the visual work of art sometimes, and they think to themselves that they have to do exactly the same thing. And the issue here is that the people who are doing it and that doing it successfully are creating these visual carousels in such a way that it doesn't take away from the message of the carousel itself, and it actually adds to the message. The issue is that if you're fairly new at this, or if you're just not that good at creating these visual carousels, then any photos you add, any illustrations you add, anything else you add apart from the message itself simply distracts the reader from what you're trying to say. And if you're distracting the reader from what you're trying to say, you're not getting across your point. You're not getting across the impact you want to have. So ultimately what happens is that while yes, people might be liking your carousels, they might be saving them, they might be sharing them because they look nice, it's not actually having an impact on that person. So then what's the point of actually creating that content in the first place? Because it's not going to get you anywhere. You're simply tricking yourself into thinking you're making progress when actually you're not having any impact at all apart from making something that looks pretty. And that's not what you want to be doing with your time. So make sure your carousel does not distract people. Don't add anything for no reason. Make everything on that carousel serve a purpose. If it doesn't serve a purpose, get rid of it. The next pro tip is to write for skimmers. Now, what we tend to forget is that being on Instagram, being on social media, we are not in the mindset of having a very good attention span. This is just reality. I do it, you do it, everyone else does it. We scroll through the feed just like a zombie, looking at everything, double tapping content as we go, and skim read everything we read. And only a handful of content will actually grab our attention and have our full attention for that matter. So you have to make sure that when you're creating your content, we create it for the majority of people who aren't in that mindset of reading every single word that you write, and they prefer to just skim read and binge content quite quickly. So what you can do, write shorter sentences. So have 1 to 15 words maximum per sentence. Also remove words that serve no purpose. So if the word or sentence doesn't add anything, if you can take it away and it makes no difference to the piece of content, take it away. And also use illustrations, but use illustrations that make sense, because ultimately a picture says 1,000 words, and if you can use illustrations or images that get your point across quicker than a sentence does, you absolutely should be doing that, because by simply creating content for skimmers, then what happens is that where on average out of 100 people, only 50 people engage, well now you're going to get 75 people engage, because now we are accommodating the skimmers so that even if they do skim read our content, they still get the idea, they still get the impact, making them much more likely to engage with your carousel, which will then help you to naturally get more engagement over time and also build that community up even more. So the next pro tip is to understand the idea of first and last. Now what this essentially means is that when people read your carousels, they're going to read the headline, they're going to read that cover slide, the second slide, the third slide, and then maybe they'll skip the middle few slides, or they won't pay as much attention, and then they'll read the final few slides, so maybe 8, 9 and 10. So the whole point of first and last is to, if you can, make sure that whatever idea, whatever message you're trying to give people, you try and condense it into the first and last slides, and then anything else in the middle is context, is adding more context to that idea, so that the people who only read the first and last slides get the impact, get the message, meaning that they will engage, but the people who decide to read the whole thing, not only do they get the message, get the impact, but they also get the context that goes with that, which then gets much more engagement from that person as well. Then you're essentially accommodating those two types of people, the people who just read the first and last slides and engage, and also the people who are your raving fans who read every single word, and you get the best of both worlds. Because you have to remember that most of the time people will only remember the last thing you said. So make sure that the first thing you say and the last thing you say have a real impact. And the final tip I want to give you is to create a shock or to create some form of surprise. Now what this means is that, look, when people are scrolling through Instagram, I've mentioned it already, our attention span just isn't what it should be. That's just natural. So we want a shock, we want some sort of surprise on the feed to grab people's attention, but also within your carousel. It's very easy within that 10 slides, depending on how you craft your carousel, to lose people's attention. So you want to make sure that throughout that carousel, you've got a shock or a surprise within it that brings people's attention back to your piece of content. So maybe it's around slide 5, slide 6, you have some form of shock, some form of surprise. It could be some form of visual shock. It could be a copywriting shock. It could be a statement you use. It could be you switch up a visual, you switch up using a video instead. Just something that shocks the reader and brings their attention back to your carousel. The whole point of this is to try and make sure that we're not losing people on our carousels, and they're not clicking off of it, and that they're not reading it and they're not engaging with it because they've not got anything from it. So have that shock, bring the attention back, but if you can, try and make it something fun, try and make it something humorous, because I've done this quite a few times and found that it's this type of content that has that shock that is also quite humorous or even quite controversial, that itself becomes a very powerful piece of content and is some of my best performing posts. For example, this one here, which you can check out on my feed and see how I use this idea of a shock on slide, I think it's slide 6 or slide 5, one of the two. So use a shock, use a surprise throughout your carousel. It really does make quite a big difference. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to drop a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys in the next one.